Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today we are once again using one of those templates that I made in the 4 ways to template video that I made not too long ago, depending on when you're watching this. I made King Arthur's helmet last time, and I thought I would go ahead and use this generic helmet base to make something unique. So this isn't necessarily based off of one particular item, but I do draw inspiration from a lot of things. Sometimes I just do fantasy searches on a Google search and see what pops up, and the particular things that I searched were like ogre and horned helmet and Lord of the Rings to get me some inspiration, and I kind of just mashed them all together using this as a starting off point. So if you want to see how I got to this point, definitely go back and watch the 4 ways to template video. If not, and you're ready to move on, let's make a horned fantasy helmet. Let's get to building. I bought a big supply of SKS's HD foam from Blick the other day and decided it's time to put that bad boy stuff to good use. I used it for a majority of this build. Definitely one of the benefits of this foam is the color. It allows you to use a regular Sharpie to mark on. Tape the template together and trace them onto your materials. I'm using some 6mm EVA. To get the other side of the helmet, just flip the template label side down and trace it again. Those lines that you see scattered all along the edges in my templates are registration marks. They help you to align the parts with each other. Do your best to get the outside surfaces as flush as possible as you work your way around those registration marks. This will save you a lot of time later when you go to sanding. My edges have contact cement on them, and I just tack everything together. I glue up one side at a time so that it doesn't sit up for too long. Now with glue in the center, I join the halves together. This can take a bit of practice to get it just right, but I know that with this build I'm not too worried about it because I plan on covering part of the seam lines up with some trim and other parts. I trace the bottom of the helmet rim onto my poster board and make a piece that I'll add just under my eyes to kind of act like a visor, getting some inspiration from some old school jousting Renaissance helmets. This nose area detail piece is made up of 3 parts. The long strip has a V-groove in the middle of it cut out, and then all of the edges where they meet each other have a 45-degree angle cut. You'll see it marked in blue on the template if you download it. Once I have built it, I position the part on my base and trace where I want it to glue up. Then I attach the new piece to my helmet. I use another one of these nose area detail pieces and attach it down to the jawline, but on the bottom of the edge. So when I attach it, I am making the inside flush with the new addition. Eventually I trim off the outside point so that it's the equal distance all the way around. I'm still just making it up as I go. No joke. I sit and stare at it for a minute to decide what I'm doing next. And I kind of decided at this point I wanted to make a lattice work for his visor. These side pieces will act as a starting and stopping point for my mouth fence. That's what we're going to call it. These parts are not templated out, they are simply 6mm strips of 1-inch wide EVA that I'll weave together. So I start on one end, trim as I go, and weave each piece in and out, alternating over and under. After looking at a lot of helmets and Google searches, I decided to add a brow to my visor. So I freehanded this shape, cut it out on some 6mm EVA, marked its position on the base, and then glued it into place. Once the majority of the major pieces were added, I started trim work, just covering seam lines and things like that. Right now it looks like an American football helmet to me, kinda, but maybe like the Renaissance version. The black foam is 4mm strips of 1-inch wide EVA, and the ones I'm about to lay down are 2mm strips, about 3/4 of an inch. That way I have a nice overlay. It needs something extra to make it stand out just a little bit more, so I crumbled up some foil into a horn shape, covered that with plastic bag, and then duct taped it together to make the template, just like I did in my 4 ways to template video. If you hadn't watched that, go back and you'll see this technique being used here. Then I traced that onto poster board, transferred it to 4mm EVA, and I'm ready to assemble it. To make a horn going the opposite way, you need to trace the template labeled side down and realize that the assembly will go the opposite direction of the one in the video. I decided on the position of my horns, and I glued one on to help me align the other. To get it close to symmetrical, I used seam lines and registration marks to help me get a general spacing of where things should go. Then I simply just mark that area on the base, put some glue on both parts, and then permanently fix them together. Using a flat bit on my wood burner, I carved in some ridges on my horns. This actually serves 2 purposes. 1, it's adding a nice little detail that'll be picked up by my paint job later, and 2, it actually helps to disguise my ugly seam lines so that it doesn't have to be perfect. Be careful when using a wood burner on foam. It's hot and it does let out some nasty fumes that you don't want to breathe in, so definitely wear a respirator and work in a well ventilated area while you do this. Like most of my props, I like a good bit of weathered, beaten up look, so I started by adding some rivets simply by pulling the sanding bit out a little on its holder and plunging that into the foam. Then I changed to a stone bit and add scratches and gouges all over the place just to add detail in flat areas. Two coats of Plasti Dip. I taped off the horns and hit everything else with a light mist of silver, some brown, and a little bit of black to give it that aged metal look as my base. I did a lot of taping off on this paint job to save myself from trying to paint straight lines. If your hands are a little shaky while painting like mine are, this is always a good option. I used some Platifex paint to give contrast to details. I went with the gold, red, and silver color scheme for this helmet. Once they dried, I went over it with some brown and black Platifex to pick up on some of the battle damage details I made earlier, push it into the cracks and the crevices, and then wipe a majority of it off with a paper towel, leaving all that paint in the details. For the horns, I did a dry brush technique and just built up layers of various shades of brown, gray, and black. You load your paintbrush up, dab most of it off onto a paper towel, and then drag your pretty much dry brush across the texture. And we are finished. Here is the end result. Overall, I think it turned out pretty cool. Definitely a unique build to say the least. I like how the front ended up. It kind of looks like a castle's drawbridge or a fence that got plastered onto this dude's helmet. Without this part on, I definitely see you could be making a Draugr or something out of this, or even chopping off pieces of it and making something like a gladiator helmet, or there's a number of ways that you could dissect this and make it your very own. I just kind of went with the flow and didn't really know where it was going when I started, and ended up with this, which I think looks pretty cool. Maybe you'll try and make one of these helmets yourself and blow people away with your abilities. That's truly my hope when you watch these videos and try them yourself. So please try it out. It's not as complicated or as intimidating as it seems. True. Maybe you'll get some.
Yay!
And inevitably, they're going to ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these. Tell them, much props. I mean, it's got horns, it's a helmet. I think I have to charge you with it, so. Peace out!